For there is nothing to guarantee that we will be able to remain long enough or deeply enough in front of the unknown, a psychological state which the traditional paths have always recognized as sacred. In that fleeting state between dreams, which is called despair in some Western teachings, and self-questioning in Eastern traditions, a person is said to be able to receive the truth, both about nature and her or his own possible role in the universal order. May the words from my heart find their reflection in the heart of the universe. Well, the opening quote comes from my one-time faculty advisor at San Francisco State, Jacob Needleman. I was drawn to this topic of despair based on my experience this week at work, as well as unfolding world events. I do not want to talk about despair. None of us do. Least of all at church. I've so often been told that I tend to focus on the negative, especially about my children. They know me. But Needleman defines this feeling that can be characterized as despair as standing in front of the unknown. Isn't that what our spiritual life is all about? Isn't that what we're trying to do when we pray? When we gather together to worship the all-pervading presence, the great mystery? And further, isn't that what we're doing when we create? Lots and lots of artists in this room know about creating. Well, Needleman says that we have to remain long enough and deeply enough in front of the mystery, the unknown. Long enough and deep enough to receive the truth about nature, both the nature of the universe and our own nature. Long enough and deep enough to discern our own role in the universe. What Native Americans sometimes call our original instructions. It is easy to walk away from this encounter with mystery because it's so scary. It's easy to focus only on our day-to-day experience of what we can see, what's clear to us. I was reminded of this moment, this fleeting state between dreams, as Needleman puts it, this past week. I sat with over 20 people, the majority of whom are experiencing what our culture calls depression and anxiety. Many of these people are able to admit that intertwined with their own personal concerns are concerns for what's going on in the world, the uncertainty of continued life on this planet, grappling with the possible outcomes of climate change, an example of which we see in Australia. With the possible outcomes of our president's rush toward violence violence and war when faced with his own demise. The choice our government is making again between life and death, between compassionate and reasonable communication and lashing out with military power. Too many times we have chosen death, the way of violence and oppression, the way of abuse and waste. Facing this reality and the uncertainty of our future that comes with it can be terrifying. Calling it despair does not go too far, but does not tell the whole story. Needleman also says that in Eastern traditions it is called self-questioning. That causes me to ask, is it so hard for us to question ourselves that we end up feeling despair? Well, I'll leave that question. But in thinking about despair, I turned again to a teacher of mine. We heard her meditation earlier, Joanna Macy. She writes in her book entitled World as Lover, World as Self, about the consequences of our feeling despair. She says that the most debilitating consequence is apathy, a turning away from difficult realities, a burying of thoughts related to our unknown future. She writes, the cause of our apathy is not mere indifference. It stems from a fear of confronting the despair that lurks subliminally beneath the terror of life as usual. A dread of what is happening to our future stays on the fringes of awareness, too deep to name and too fearsome to face. Now, this book was written in 1991. It's almost 30 years ago. To a large extent, though, we continue to live life as usual, with this sense of impending doom on the fringe of our awareness. And although some people have been able to face this despair, at least for a time, they've been able to stand in front of the unknown for perhaps more than a brief moment. Many have not. And this, she says, takes a heavy toll. She writes, not only is there an impoverishment of our emotional and sensory life, flowers are dimmer and less fragrant, our loves less ecstatic, but this psychic numbing also impedes our capacity to process and respond to information. The energy expended in pushing down despair is diverted from more creative uses, depleting the resilience and imagination needed for fresh visions and strategies. Furthermore, the fear of despair can erect an invisible screen, selectively filtering out anxiety-provoking data. In a world where organisms require feedback in order to adapt and survive, this is suicidal. That's a strong word, suicidal. But I think Macy is right. Our apathy has the potential to stop our life-affirming instincts, our ability to open up to fresh visions and strategies. that we need today. Macy continues by saying that despair cannot be banished by injections of optimism or sermons on positive thinking. She says that, like grief, it must be acknowledged and worked through. As a counselor and a minister, I'm often faced with despair from the people I work with as a therapist, and also in my struggle to bring a meaningful, uplifting, and profound message to this church. This, at the same time as I am dealing with this despair myself. And I've been struggling. I, like so many others, have found myself pushing down the despair I feel. And this has its consequences. For me, I think it has had physical consequences. I experience an undefined anxiety about life that manifests as difficulty breathing. Share this with someone. And with this, I'm not alone. I have several clients that I meet with that experience this as well. Although their life situation and set of challenges may differ from mine, they acknowledge that this doesn't seem to have anything to do with their everyday worries about money, relationships, health. Instead, it's a sort of nebulous fear that they find difficult to pin down. And difficulty breathing is only one possible physical symptom of trying to avoid the sense of despair. Macy describes her own bouts with this condition when she found herself on the floor in her office, curled like a fetus and shaking. Others deal with this feeling in a different way. We may watch unending movies about disasters that give the illusion of having dealt with our despair, worked through our grief. Or we take pills, or we gamble, or we work even harder to distract ourselves. This pushes down the despair, which often comes out in even another way, as addiction, or again as physical or mental illness. Macy states that in a religious context, despair can appear as a lapse in faith, a self-questioning, as Nagleman points out. This is the point at which we're meant to linger a bit. Not out of masochism, but out of curiosity. Out of the hope of an encounter with the great mystery, with the all-pervading presence of the universe. And from this encounter, we have the possibility of receiving some answers, some truths. Well, this is difficult and sometimes very slow work. Like anything else in life, it requires some effort. But if we allow the necessary time and space, we may find that we're able to develop an authentic hope. Not the the superficial hope of those sermons on positive thinking, not the superficial hope of cognitive behavioral therapy. I'm not saying that at times this type of hope isn't necessary. It brings us through to the next minute, to the next hour, to the next day, perhaps to the next week. But in the long run, in order to actually come together to save our planet, to be part of trying to extend the survival of Earth and its species, we need a more active hope, one that can take form in concrete plans and projects, one that is open to the possibilities our encounter with the divine can provide. And we know, we in this room at least, know that none of us can do this alone. This lingering in front of the unknown, the great mystery, is group work. We must know that we are not alone in it. Otherwise, we would or could dismiss it as unimportant. Macy relates a dream that her son had that illustrates the power of community in this work. In his dream, he's standing together with members of his community, looking out over a darkened city. All is bleak and cold. Through their linked hands, he feels the current of the group's energy. They chant and the current grows stronger. Lights begin to appear and soon the city is aglow, empowered by the energy of their trust and commitment. Well, sensing our connection to each other, to other life forms, and to the entire universe is, of course, necessary in order to sustain the work needed to heal our world. The awareness of this connection is what fuels the compassion we spoke of in our meditation, breathing through the suffering and the pain, but also breathing through our entire experience. I'd like to leave us today with a prayer from Laguna Pueblo. I add my breath to your breath, that our days may be long on the earth, that the days of our people may be long, that we shall be as one person, that we may finish our road together. May we in this community be as one person. May we draw strength from each other and as individuals in community. Cultivate the will and the strength to remain long enough and deep enough in front of the unknown, the great mystery of life, in order to receive truth and imagine and construct renewed life and an active